I'm going to ask you to pause and look down at what you are wearing to inspect the reality of your clothes. Look closely at the creases in your shirt where you've sat hunched and typing, the scuff on your shoe where you kicked your heels as you waited for the bus, the stain where you ate your breakfast too quickly or leant in to hug your sticky-handed child. You are dressed in the things you have done today and the things you have done before. You are enveloped in material memories. As Alexis kindly said, I'm Ellen Sampson. I'm a material culture researcher and artist who uses practice-based research to explore the relationships between clothing and the body, both in museums and archives and in everyday life. I'm interested in the way that through use, people and the things they wear become entwined, and how these entanglements, or in these entanglements, agencies, both human and non-human, are distributed through and across our clothes. Specifically, my research is concerned with examining and recording the marks of use as indexical traces which have the potential to render the mundane, the habitual, the everyday as auratic. As a photographer, my work utilises a number of approaches to analyse, record and highlight the effective powers of bodily trace. I use photography and filming, obviously, but also making and wearing garments designed to break down more readily than everyday clothes. As I talk, I'll be showing you some images of this work. However, I don't plan to talk directly to it, instead about the ideas that surround it. So I'm going to talk about the ideas my work explores, and if anyone is interested in talking about the processes through which I make this work, please do come and talk to me later. Often when I'm asked about my reason for my interest in the marks of wear, these potentially abject scuffs and stains, I return to this quote by photographer Isayuchi Miyako, who I think Michelle is going to talk more about later. And she writes here about the similarities between the scar and the photograph. Oh, sorry. She says, "I continue to take photographs of scars. I cannot stop because they are so much like a photograph. More than like, they have almost the same quality as a photograph. There are visible events in the past recorded in days. Both scars and photographs are the manifestation of sorrow for many things that can never be retrieved." And as a photographer and filmmaker, I'm really interested in how photographic theory might be used to think about these traces. Obviously the work of Walter Benjamin, but also the work of people like Roland Barthes and Georges Didier Huberman. And more broadly, I'm very, very interested in the work of anthropologist Alfred Gell. And I think what I'd say links all of these theorists is an interest in the impact of artworks on the viewer, what we as contemporary writers and scholars might think of as affect, but they would variously term punctum, cognitive stickiness, or of course aura. So my doctoral research explored the symbolic and material power of worn shoes, suggesting that attachment to footwear derives not simply from consumption, status or desire, but from a sustained tactile relationship that develops through use. Drawing on the range of anthropological and psychoanalytic perspectives on attachment, affect and the self, it sought to highlight the experience of wearing and the materiality of wornness, presenting shoes as records of lived experience. It highlighted the material traces of this relationship, the way they were embodied in the artifacts themselves. And this research utilised an autoethnographic methodology of writing an object and filmmaking, constructing objects and making images of them as they broke down and were worn. However, central to my work is also the practice of wearing, of using shoes and garments, and through use altering their form. As such, it positions wearing as another form of making. The shoes I made were transformed through use. And in doing this, I hope that the empty shoes are records of an absent performance, of gestures which are lost to the viewer, so that only their traces, the marks upon the shoe, remain. By taking these artifacts into the gallery, I aim to create an encounter between the viewer and the artifact, one which really highlights the way that the body and the garment might intermingle. How, when garment and body are cleaved, we read and experience what is left behind. And some of those images are in Colleen's beautiful exhibition, The Triptych of Cloth Shoes, which was a series that I wore over a very short period of time for some performances in London about 2 years ago. And at the moment, I'm currently extending that research, the research which had looked at traces on things I made and photographed, to look at wear on archival and museum garments in the Costume Institute collection. And this research particularly seeks to explore how we can presence the bodily practices of wearing and maintaining clothes as lived and embodied experience in garments where little or no biographical evidence about the wearers exist, which I think is something that Billy might also be touching upon later today. So, this paper was titled, or is titled, The Afterlife of Clothes, Why Worn Clothes Matter, which was obviously a play on the words materiality and material, coming, as I do, from perhaps what would be called a new materialist school, but also a genuine question. Why do worn things matter? Why should we, as researchers, curators, and conservators, attend to them? In many ways, that question was answered by the response to the call for papers, where almost 100 people had something they wanted to say about these often overlooked garments. And I have to say that Colleen, Alexis and I were completely overwhelmed by the level of interest in this topic. Today is going to focus on imperfect garments and our responses to them in multiple ways, but I wanted to start by framing that discussion by talking about the importance of imperfection and the power of the worn and used, the ways that the creases, scuffs and stains which litter our garments act upon us. The first thing to say about imperfect garments is perhaps that they're prevalent and ubiquitous, not the exception, but the rule. For the vast majority of our clothes are neither new in shops or pristine examples in museums. Neither are these items wholly destroyed. The majority of our clothes are in this liminal state that is wornness. It is this in-between state which is the condition of most things we wear. Garments are also not in stasis, a word which I think was really eloquently used by Museum of London curator Beatrice Belen to describe objects away from the body in archives, although I think Sarah will also talk about the fact that those objects themselves are not in stasis, but instead in a constant state of flux. As we wear, launder and store our clothes, their material form is continuously being transformed. The second reason to attend more closely to these imperfect garments and their potential abject things is that they sit outside more conventional understandings of fashion system, so that even a system that I think is often predicated on newness, consumption and desire. Frequently, the more a garment is worn, the less it relates to the original or ideal image that we are presented with. And I think this is particularly true in relation to the creased and crumpled surfaces, which seem very much at odds to me with late capitalism's fetishization of smoothness. I mean, if you think about Apple products, we buy things which are almost always impenetrable and smooth. Worn garments subvert notions of glamour and desire by being appealing or effective, or both, because, rather in spite of their imperfections. And what I suggest is that in the study of the things we wear, it is vital that we engage with these objects, that as well as the glamour of fashion, we really attend to the materiality of dress. So, beyond their prevalence and position outside the fashion system, worn garments have three qualities which I think make them an important category of objects in our networks of things. They are entangled, they are indexical, and they have agency. They act upon us. So entanglement. As makers and wearers of clothes, we implicitly understand that people and the garments they wear are entangled. The intimate nature of this relationship is highlighted in the way it is expressed through language. It's just not me, someone will say, or it fits like a second skin. We think ourselves into the things we wear, and through this projection, they become an integral part of ourselves. Our garments are simultaneously signifiers of identity, participants in, and witnesses to our embodied experience. Archaeologist Ian Hodder writes of people and the things they wear as being entangled, inseparable from environments. The artifact, the user, and their environment are in a continuous iterative dialogue, each one changing the next. Hodder explores the complex and the complex and dynamic codependence, that's a terrible sentence, of humans and things, drawing upon Gibson's theory of affordances, where he interprets the one in which artifacts afford or allow human behaviour. So that a shoe, for example, may permit a user to walk longer, a chair might allow them to sit, or a path to cross space. Material things facilitate and produce our relationship with the world. Though Hodder presents these entanglements as social and practical, I would suggest that they are also tactile and emotional, that as we wear our clothes, we become attached to them, that through the tactile experience of wear, attachment grows and builds. The enabling nature of our clothing, its capacity to allow us certain behaviours and movements, draws the user closer to the garment, and touch creating attachment, but also hastening decay. And I'm very interested in this complex kind of paradox of how as we wear something more and love it more, we also begin to lose it. These entanglements, whether practical or emotional, are a meeting and transference of agencies, so as each interaction remains minutely and materially within the garment. The garment is thus a complex web of agencies. As we mingle with our garments through use, they become imbued with our agency, so that we inhabit our clothes even when we are gone from them, even when they are not on the body. The fact that garments may retain the agencies of makers and previous users means that in interacting with a used garment, one is meeting with the agencies of other than one's own. One is meeting with a multiple and complex web of agencies. So, our clothes, as you can see, simultaneously companions in our embodied experience, extensions of our bodily selves, and communicative tools, do not remain the same in perpetuity. With each wear, each gesture, each step, they are worn down and destroyed. These manifestations of wear are the scuffs, wrinkles, and creases which make apparent our embodied experience of wearing. These marks, the traces of our embodied relationship with our clothes, are prevalent and multiple. Though we may launder our clothes, our garments are progressively and cumulatively altered as the body, environment, and garment meet. These marks are the records of the way clothing mediates our passage through the world. Gesture is preserved in the garment, even when our bodies are gone. Traces of our motion remain. These marks form a web, a map of experience. The worn garment is a repository of experience, a container of trace. The second reason that I suggest that imperfect garments are powerful is their indexicality. The index, a semiotic term for a sign which has a causal relationship with the signified, is often used to discuss the power of imprint and trace, particularly in relation to photographs. And I'm sorry, it's kind of quite a sort of heavy bit of text. But art historian Margaret Iverson, who writes about photography and trauma, summarises the index, I think, particularly well. The index as a trace is produced by actual contact with an object, a footprint in the sand, for example. But the object itself is absent. In this instance, attention is directed to something which was present in the past. And I like that idea, a thing that was present in the past, a body that was present in the past. The trace does not evaporate in the moment of its production, but remains as a witness to an anteriority. So, this anteriority, which is a word that I would really say is key to what I think about objects, this ability to sit between two times is what the worn garment embodies. It is akin to the way that Roland Barthes writes about the photograph as having a particular punctum, a word we might also use instead of affect. The type of consciousness the photograph involves is indeed, I quote, the type of consciousness the photograph involves is indeed truly unprecedented, since it establishes not a consciousness of being there of the thing, which any copy might give, he's referring to Benjamin here, but an awareness of its having been there. What we have is a new space-time category, a spatial immediacy and a temporal anteriority, the photograph being an illogical conjunction between the here now and the there then. And so, for me, to paraphrase and really quite distort Barthes' terminology, the worn garment as a bearer of indexical trace is a having been there object, an object which sits between the there then and the here now. However, Unlike the photograph, which indexicality stems from the touch of light on film, what Barth would call a light cast, the worn garment's indexicality is dependent on physical contact. It is indexicality based on touch. If garments are records of experience, objects which embody engagement through use, then the marks upon them might be understood as what museum studies scholar Jeffrey Feldman refers to as contact points, a category of objects that results from physical contact with and then the body, and then its subsequent removal or destruction. For Feldman, these objects, letters, hair jewellery, and of course clothes, have a particular affect which stems from their ability to recall an absent body. Indeed, literary theorists Peter Stalabras and Rosalind Jones describe accessories in a similar way. In particular, they talk of them as detachable parts of the body, things which are capable of troubling the conceptual opposition between person and things. And I think this ambiguity, particularly with accessories, lies in both the bodily nature of their form and the extended periods for which they're worn. I suggest that it is our tactile entanglements with our clothes which allow the blurring of subject and object to occur, because in wearing our garments, which frequently already correspond to our physical form, they become more bodily, not just imprinted, but imbued with bodily trace, with sweat, with blood, with skin flakes, and with tears. And this transposition is an exchange of material agencies. Just as if one spills a drop of wine on a dress and it is absorbed, it is unclear if that stain is part of the dress, irreversibly absorbed in its form, or part of the wine one was pouring by accident when it occurred, or both. It is a transposition of the material of the original, a rearrangement of matter, so that one becomes part of another. This intermingling, I say, blurs the edges of the object. And it is this intermingling of the artifact, the experience of an artifact which confuses the opposition between person and thing, that my work attempts to call forth, both in photographing the signs of wear and in bringing these worn objects into the gallery. As the garment becomes bodily, as lines between subject and object blur, it becomes unique. Wearing is a form of individualization. The worn object is inseparable from the movements which have produced it. Gesture trace is always original. This originality, I think, can sometimes seem at odds with the nature of many mass-produced things. However, though mass-produced clothes start out as near identical, they are individuated and made through use and wear. For example, a newspaper may be read, folded, crumpled, and used to wrap food or broken glass over the course of the day. It's made original through its entanglements with agencies other than its own. Similarly, I would say that most mass-produced garments start out as near identical, not identical, but similar, but are quickly individualized with the unique qualities of a wearer's body, their gait, their environment, but also the way they are stored, cleaned, and exchanged. Objects become intimate through use. The wearer makes the garment unique, not merely through dressing and styling, but through the alteration of its material form, so that wear renders the mass-produced auratic. A central question of my work has been, and remains, what is the value of the worn and used garment? I suggest that through wear, the mass-produced, the anonymized commodity, so often separate from its maker in our culture, becomes unique. A record of gestures, of a performance, of a life. That in wearing, the already porous line between subject and object, between person and thing, breaks down, so that as our garments touch our bodily selves, as sweat soaks fabric and toes stretch leather, wearer and worn are entangled and transposed. I suggest that there is not just one instance of intermingling, but many, that each time a garment and body meet and touch through wear, the self and the garment mix. Attachment is cumulative and tactile, a process of repetition, that through these incorporations, the garment becomes part of the wearer or maker, and the wearer or maker becomes part of the garment. Garments are thus accumulations of agencies, incorporated through production and use. The manifestation of these agencies is apparent in the way that a garment wears. The creases, scuffs, and folds, which are the inevitable outcomes of use. In mixing with the bodies that touch them, they become repositories of bodily trace. Imperfect garments are powerful because they are entangled, mingled with the makers and users who have held and touched them, so that we inhabit our clothes, even the clothes we wear, even when they are not on the body, even when we are gone for them. Gesture is preserved within the garment. Even when our bodies are gone, traces of this motion remains. These marks form a web, a map of experience, the warm garment as a container of trace. Our relationship with worn and used garments can run the gamut from comfortable and familiar, even comforting, to abject, horrifying and unknown, so that in observing and handling the used garments of others, we are continually engaging with the distributed agencies of others. These agencies remain present and bodily, even when separated from the body. These agencies remain present even when they are separated from the body who produced it. The self is distributed through its presence in these warm and habitual things. These distributed parts of the self remain within the garment so that they may act upon the viewer and user. Thus, the worn and used garment has a power invested, I say, by use rather than by manufacture, design, or cultural signification, to act as an emissary for the absent body, to act for the absent body in different and distant locations. Thank you.